Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitang Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jata Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Brindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Are there lights in here? Did they? Oh, the power went off. Okay. Thought it was lighter before I closed my eyes. So welcome everybody. We're kind of beginning a series of talks that'll go on for most days for the next 30 days or so. And my name is Kaustubha Das. I'm from New York City, and but close friend of so many people that are putting on this beautiful festival. So I've been asked to speak here. I'm looking forward to spending time with everyone. You're all welcome to come as much as you like, of course. And maybe I'll just start by just sharing a couple things. One is that I don't feel it's my position to necessarily convince you of anything. I just feel my role is not so much as a preacher, but as someone whose duty is to try to represent the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam in an authentic way. And of course, you can take that information and do with it as you wish. But that being said, I may often be using language that kind of implies a faith in it. I may speak of reincarnation as a fact, or so on. These aren't, if I do that in any way, it's not that I mean to push that point of view, but I'm just speaking from that, speaking from that point of view. Is that all right? Okay. And another thing I like to say is I like to make friends this way. I've made many lifelong friends this way, just by speaking on these topics and discussing them. So I hope that we can all be friends this way, and that if I may serve you in any way going forward, please feel free to approach me. And one other thing I'd like to share is that we're going to discuss essentially yoga philosophy, bhakti yoga philosophy in particular, but yoga philosophy in general. And people approach it for different reasons. We hear wonderful descriptions of states of awareness that yogis or sages have achieved, especially, when we think stereotypically of the great yogis, we think of the area where we're at now, and places, here and further up these mountains. So many great souls came. They would go up those mountains all alone to find themselves. And when we read these, it may seem like those states are impossible to achieve, or maybe just some very, very rare souls can achieve them. Or maybe in past ages it was achievable, but in this age not so much. But my conviction is that all of us sitting in this room today can achieve that in this life. That if we make it our goal, if we make it our focus, that we could achieve those kind of wonderful states of awareness. It'll require the right determination. It'll require a path that's practical for us, a path that works for us. But I believe that it can be done. And I hope that by coming together and sharing with each other, that we can all come closer to that. So maybe I'll begin by just sharing a little personal story. When I was about 20 years old, my interest in bhakti developed, maybe a little bit when I was 19 or so, but it kind of got more intense when I was 20 years old. And at that time, a friend of mine invited me to a program in his apartment. And he was like a real kind of New York City street kid, but he had an interest in bhakti. And he had kind of a bare apartment in the Lower East Side of New York. And I wandered into that program where my other friends, who were these kind of wild New York City kids, were just hanging out. And in walked in this sadhu. And I had never seen one before in my life. And he sat down in the middle of the room with us. He spoke for an hour and a half. And by the time that talk was over and I stepped back out onto the sidewalks of New York City again, I said to myself, I need to dedicate my life to this. It was that, it kind of entered, his message entered into my ears and went straight to my heart and had a powerful effect on me. And so shortly after that, another sadhu invited me to travel with him. And I traveled across America with him and then eventually to India. And I ended up in a place called Mayapur, which is in West Bengal. And it's on the bank of the Ganges River, very beautiful, holy site. And welcome. And when one morning, I woke up early, and actually it was about sunrise that I just kind of went off for kind of a meditative walk down a quiet road that followed the bank of the Ganges River. And along that walk, it's very quaint, even more so at that time, which was like 38 or 39 years ago. It's a bit more built up now, but it's very quaint, especially at that time. And it was, people were just waking up, so it was quiet. And as I got towards the end of that road, a man approached me, a local man. And he tried to sell me a mridanga, a drum. And I expressed, no, thank you, not interested. And then he asked me where I was from. And so I said, I'm from New York. He said, you're from the United States? I said, yes. He said, can you help me? And I said, I don't know, maybe. And he said, I have something from America, but I don't know how to use it. Can you help show me how to use it? I said, sure. So right on the side of the road, he had a house, but it was a tiny little house. It was maybe about as big as this stage. And he invited me inside. And he sat me down on the floor. There's only a bed and the floor. And he closed all the shutters of his home like something very secretive was about to happen. And he said, I have something from America, and I need you to help me figure out how to use it. I said, okay, well, what do you have? He says, it's a heater. I said, okay, let's see it. So from underneath the bed, he slid out a cardboard box, and he put it right in front of me. And I opened up the box, and I looked inside, and I didn't see a heater. What I saw inside the box was a waffle iron. And I had no idea how this poor man got a waffle iron, apparently thinking that it was a heater. Maybe someone cheated him in some way, or I'm not sure. But I had to explain to him that this was not a heater. This isn't something that will heat your room up. This is a waffle iron. And I had to try to explain to him what a waffle was. I said it's something like a very big jalebi. And of course, I had to leave him disappointed like that. But the reason I bring this story up is because it relates to some kind of essential teaching that we can find amongst the yogis, amongst the sages, and that has to do with the word dharma. We hear this word dharma a lot, and it's used in different ways. It's like many Sanskrit words, it can be applied in different ways. But there's some sages teach that there's two types of dharma. But dharma essentially means something's purpose, right? That everything is designed with purpose. A waffle iron is designed with a particular purpose. You might try to heat your room with it. You might turn it on and come close to it and try to warm yourself up. And it might heat you up a little bit, but it's not really doing what it's designed to do that way. It was designed with a particular purpose in mind, and that was to make waffles. When it's making waffles, it's situated in its dharma. It's doing its purpose. And the yogis say every object has its dharma, has its purpose. And so the question would be, what is the dharma of the self? What is the dharma of the self? And in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, the idea is the dharma of the self. Again, there are two types of dharmas that the sages speak of. One is called naimittika dharma. And that means dharmas that are, you could say, temporary or relative. We all have roles that we play that maybe we didn't play at a previous time in our life, or maybe that we won't play in the future, or we have dharmas, some role that we play due to the different circumstances that we find ourselves in, right? Relative circumstance. I may have one dharma, you may not. You may not share that dharma. You know, do we have any mothers here, fathers here, parents here? Your father? So at one point you weren't a father, but then times changed and circumstances changed, and then you adopted the dharma of being a father. That came with, it's a certain role that one plays, and it comes with certain responsibilities. You know, and then as children grow up, then even that dharma may change. Parent may relate to the child in a different way. So there are temporary dharmas that we have. But the yogis speak of a nitya dharma, a type of dharma that never changes. And the nitya dharma, they say, is a dharma that's shared with all living beings. It's not that I have one and you have another, but that every living being shares this dharma. And again, in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, it's taught that the dharma of the self, the dharma of the soul, the dharma of the Atma, is ultimately to love, or you could say to serve with love. That is what the self, in a sense, you could say, is designed for. In a sense, it's what it's made of and what it's designed for. And when we're situated in that state of awareness, we're situated in our dharma, our true essence. We've reached our true essence. It's kind of like some things are, you cook them down until you get to its essence. Right? You remove everything that's not its essence until you get to its essence. Its essence is its real identity. Its essential characteristic. Like the essence of sugar would be, what anyone say? Sweetness, right? Sugar is all about sweetness. It's its essence. If it's not sweet, it's not sugar, right? So similarly, they say the essence of the self is this divine love. Right? When we cooked away everything else, all other false ideas, all the other false attachments, and we cook ourselves right down to the essence, then what we find there is divine love. And so the yogis were searching for that. They were looking for that. Especially the yogis up here, they lived in nature. Now, sometimes it's a little sad to see the state of Rishikesh. It's a little built up. But you don't have to go too far to find these quiet places, places where real yogis are going deep. And of course, living in nature, a lot of their teachings involve nature analogies. And one real important analogy that the yogis handed down was the analogy of the musk deer. There's a deer that roams these hills. I know in the United States we have deer, but it's a kind of a different breed. But they have this deer here called the musk deer. It's a little smaller than the American deer or the European deer. South American deer?
It's different.
Different also. Mexican deer? Maybe a little different. It's the musk deer is a little smaller than the American deer. It's got a little bit of a mousier kind of shape to it. And it's got tusks as well. Tusks that come out. Welcome. But what's especially special about the musk deer is that there's a gland near the navel of this male deer. And within that gland, it produces this aroma called musk. We've all heard of musk, I think. The aroma is so enchanting. There's nothing like it. Right? And the yogis would observe this deer, and they would see that in the mating season it would begin to emanate this aroma. And they would watch the deer, and they would see that the deer itself would become captivated by this aroma. It would take it, it would take it in, and it would wonder, what is that? Where is it coming from? It's so enchanting. And would start to search for that aroma. And they say that, the yogis say that this deer, it would start to search for that aroma, and it would search everywhere. And it would become more and more frustrated and confused, not being able to find it. And even the deer would start to run through the forest, trying to find the source of the aroma. Where is it? Where is it coming from? And they say that this deer would run to the point of exhaustion and even collapse, searching for this aroma, not realizing all along that that aroma was coming from within its own self. Okay? Interesting. Now the yogis would say we are like those musk deer, right? That we are running and we are searching. We all have our own jungle or forest that we're running through. I'm from New York City. It's a big jungle, right? And people are running through that jungle. They're running into the apartments and into the offices and into the bars and into the clubs and into the parks and running here and there, restaurants, and they're searching for something. What are they searching for? They're searching for happiness, right? They're searching, they're running, they're searching to the point of exhaustion, and sometimes we search even to the point of collapse, right? Sometimes we collapse. Not realizing all along that the happiness that we're looking for externally is actually within our own self. It's the nature of the self. This is the faith, of the yogis. And if it's a faith, if we follow it and follow it and follow it, we can realize it. We can experience it. Further down the river here, if we go down to Haridwar, there was a meeting that took place there. This meeting is discussed in the text called the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam, 18,000 verses, the culmination of all of the sage Vyasadeva's writings of his Vedic literature. It's the most brilliant, fascinating text. And in there it tells the story of one sage named Vidura. How many of you have heard of Vidura before? If you've read Mahabharata, you'll come across Vidura. He was like the advisor of King Dhritarashtra. And King Dhritarashtra's son was Duryodhana. And it was Duryodhana that caused all the problem in the Mahabharata. He was so envious of the Pandavas, he just couldn't take it. And sometimes his uncle, Vidura, would have to speak up, speaking to the king and saying, your son is taking you down a wrong path. He needs to learn to appreciate his cousins. Sorry for that. Is that all right? I knew I felt something unusual there. And he would advise the king, Dhritarashtra, you need to love your nephews, the Pandavas, with the same love that you love your own sons. Their father had passed away. You need to love them with that same kind of love. But he could never do it. Dhritarashtra was blind not only physically, but also he had a certain blindness in terms of his spirituality or blindness in terms of his wisdom. So he could never quite love the Pandavas the same way as he loved his own son, even though his own son was so, had such a disturbed mind. And the Pandavas were so noble. Their character was so noble. So once when Vidura was speaking up like this, Duryodhana became so angry and frustrated with Vidura, he threw him out of the kingdom. He said, throw him out of the kingdom with nothing but his breath. But even though Vidura was, in a sense, working in a political circles as an advisor to the king, he was a deeply realized spiritual yogi. And so when he was insulted this way, and when he was thrown out in this way, he didn't respond with any anger. He didn't respond with any resentment. He saw it as the movings of the universe moving his life in a way that he should learn to work in harmony with. And so he decided, I will take advantage of this opportunity. I did what I could here. I tried to do what good I could do. It wasn't appreciated. That's not my business. My business is to do what I can. Now I've been thrown out. Okay, I'll accept that fate. And I'll go to the mountains. And I'll search out the sadhus and the sages. And I'll use this time to go on pilgrimage to these holy places and go deeper and deeper within myself. And so he came to Haridwar. And in Haridwar, he met a sage named Maitreya. And Vidur asked him a really important question. He said, I've heard from the sages, I've heard from the yogis that it's our nature is happiness, right? That the very nature of the self is deep spiritual bliss. And I've also heard that the nature of the self, being composed of spiritual energy, not material energy, but being composed of spiritual energy, that the nature of the self is changeless. That it never changed. Time can't change it, right? Material elements like the wind or fire or so on can't change it. Nothing can change the nature of the self. So if the nature of the self is that it's blissful by nature, and also that it's unchanging, then how is it that we're not feeling bliss all the time? Why do we experience other emotions and other feelings, other states of mind? Why do we feel anger? Why do we feel frustration? Why do we feel boredom? Why do we feel depression? Why do we feel anxiety? Right? We're blissful by nature, but at the same time we're changeless. How can that be? Now, Maitreya gave another nature example, right? These sages use so many analogies to help us understand. Analogies can be so useful in understanding spiritual truths because they're a little bit more difficult to grasp. They're a little bit subtle. And so sometimes anchoring it to something that we can see helps us make the connection. So he shared another nature analogy. First we heard the one about the deer, now we hear one about the moon. He said if we look at the moon, right, let's picture a full moon at nighttime. When you look at the moon, it's steady in the sky. It's shining its light steadily, right? It's not flickering like the leaves that are blowing in the breeze. It's not shifting shapes and here one moment and gone the next, like the clouds may be blown by the wind. The moon is steady in the sky, shining its light. But if we look at the reflection of the moon on the river, it's likely they're standing right on the bank of this river here, as he said this. If we look at the reflection of the moon on the river, then we'll see that the moon has apparently taken on the qualities of the river. The river isn't steady. The river is flowing and rippling. And if we look at the reflection of the moon on the surface of the water and we think that that's the moon, if we misidentify that reflection on the water as the moon, then it will appear to us as if the moon is also rippling, as if the moon is also shifting. And he said, our disconnection with our own nature is like that. We haven't lost touch with our nature. It's always there. Nothing's been lost. Our nature is unchangeable, untouchable, right? But because we're misidentifying, you could say, in a sense, a reflection of the self on the mind, then we begin to think that the self has taken on the characteristics of the mind. Now, the mind is a very interesting thing. The mind is this very subtle form of matter, right? We may not be able to see the mind, but it exists on the material level, and that means that by nature it's always shifting, always changing, right? Always shifting from one taking on one form, shifting and taking on another. If we think that the mind is the self, if we misidentify the self as the mind, then we will feel as if we are shifting and changing. I am shifting. A yogi can observe the mind, even observe a mind of a yogi that is perhaps not fully enlightened will observe their own mind, right? And say, I see this emotion has come. Now that emotion has come. I see it shifting from feelings of pleasure to feelings of pain to feelings of distress. I can watch that happen, right? But I'm watching it. That's not me. And in one sense, you could say it's a reflection of me, but it's not real. Right? But if we buy into it, If we feel that my own thoughts are me, that the own movements and fluctuations in my mind are me, if we identify with the mind, what to speak of the body, right? Then we're destined to continually experience shifts in awareness, constant shifts in awareness, painful shifts in awareness. So Vidura took this teaching. Oh, I see. Okay, this is it. My nature is unchanging. My nature is blissful. It's just my mind going through all these shifts. And if I can separate myself from my mind, if I can cease to identify with my mind, right, and understand who I am underneath it all, boil it all down to the essence, right, then I can experience myself. So he set out to do that. Maybe I'll pause here for a moment. I'd like to leave things open for thoughts, open for questions, if anybody has any. Anything so far? How are we feeling so far? No, it's okay?
Do we know the timeline?
Yes. Timeline of?
These events?
Well, within the tradition, it's believed that all of these events from Mahabharata were roughly 5,000 years ago. So it was about 5,000 years ago that this conversation took place on the bank of the Ganges in Hardwar. And those teachings are still handed down, just as valuable, just as meaningful, just as meaningful as the day they were spoken. Yes.
So in this wonderful story that you shared, this river has a purpose to a degree. Can you explain a little bit about the purpose of the mind then?
You see, the mind is something that's, we tend to think we need it. We tend to think that we need this body. But actually the self doesn't need these things at all. It's something like entering into a virtual world. Like if you're playing a video game. I've never played any of these advanced video games. I understand they get quite creative and detailed. Now, when I was young, it was relatively simple. But now you take on like an avatar, they call it, right? Like you can take on an identity within the video game. And you get a certain body with certain characteristics. You get a certain name, a certain form, certain abilities, and so on. And then you live through that identity or that avatar. So the yogis say our bodies and our minds are equipment that we get moving through essentially a virtual world, thinking that we're dependent on these tools to engage with the world. But actually, we're not dependent on them at all. In one sense, they are all going to disintegrate. They're coming together, taking on certain forms, and then disintegrating. We're beyond that. And so while we want to engage in the virtual world, as long as we want to engage in the virtual world, we'll be given the equipment to do that. And part of that equipment is the material mind. Yoga is all about understanding the mind. It's whatever aspect of yoga we're connected with, it's designed to address the mind, specifically designed to address the mind. Like it may be a mantra, it may be a ritual, it may be aspects of the yoga culture, and lifestyle. It may be asana, it may be pranayama. There's so many different practices are there, so many different meditations are there. You can always follow a line from that practice to the mind. It's always designed to address the mind, because the mind is what's standing between us and the experience of our true nature. So when we speak of yoga, certainly we can speak of asana. It's an important aspect of yoga. It's a beautiful practice of yoga. It can be a very effective means of yoga. But its value is in its connection to the mind, how it affects the mind. Everything in yoga has to do with how it affects. Even if you say there are like therapeutic aspects of, say, asana, how it affects the body. But still, it's because the body affects the mind that it becomes important to the yogi. So yoga isn't just a beautiful way of moving, but essentially it's a beautiful way of thinking. It's how we change our thoughts, how we elevate our thoughts. So I'd like to use a definition, a shared definition of yoga. This definition we can, like as I'm speaking over the course of these next weeks, is a definition we can keep coming back to. You ready? If you take this in and even memorize this, it's not difficult to memorize. I've found in my own life that it's been like a key to really help me understand what yoga is. Sometimes people say, "Well, my golf game is yoga." Is it? Let's see. And that is this: yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Got that? I'll say it again. Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. Right? There are three different topics here: the nature of the self, the mind, and the practices. Right? Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing its own true nature. How many of you have studied the Yoga Sutras a bit, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras? Okay. So in the Yoga Sutras, we also get a kind of a definition of yoga that's similar, very similar to this. Maharaj, welcome. Raghunath, welcome. Very well. So there we hear this Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha. You're all familiar with this? Perhaps the first or second most commonly quoted sutras from the Yoga Sutras. That yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, right? And then it says, then the seer, the drista, abides in their own true nature, right? It's a very similar kind of definition. If you could still your mind, then you could abide in your own true nature. You could experience your own true nature. Patanjali uses the term drista, which means the seer. But he could have just as easily said the atma, or the jiva. Because he's talking not about the eye, it's not the eyes that see. The eyes are just a lens. And it's the self, it's the soul that sees through the eyes. So when he says drista, it means the one that's experiencing, right? The eyes don't experience anything. It's just a machine, part of a machine, a camera. It's the self that experiences underneath. So he's saying if the mind can be stilled, it's almost like turning off. Let's say this room were like full of video screens and big speakers that were blasting sound, and we're stuck in that room all alone with all of this sensory data just being poured into our senses, just flashing images and loud sounds. It would be very, after a short while probably, it would kind of wear us down a bit. And even people are tortured this way. And say we tolerated that for some hours. Sometimes when I'm around some of these discos around here, I feel like that. They're blasting music at all hours of the day, even in a holy place like Rishikesh. But after some hours, if they switched off the sound, someone just pulled the plug on it and it just became silent. Well, then when you feel like, feel a sense of relief and like, now I can be myself again. Now I can have my own thoughts again. I can experience myself. So Patanjali is saying is something like that lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, we've been trapped in a sense. Trapped with a mind that's running from one thought to the next thought, to the next thought, to the next thought, to the next thought. And we're just getting dragged around by that, being forced to experience whatever that mind is experiencing. However that mind is programmed to respond to it, we become the victim of that. So Patanjali is saying, if you could turn off the mind, still it, hold it on one spot, it would be like pulling the plug, and we'd actually experience the nature of the self. And if we could learn to do that for longer periods of time, we can go deep, deep, deep into a state of awareness wherein all of the false ideas that we have about ourselves, I'm this body, right? I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm white, I'm American, I'm Indian. all these different ideas that feel so real in our minds would be exposed as completely unreal, right? Because we'd be feeling something else, the real thing rising underneath, and it would be powerful and transformational and life-changing. So Patanjali is saying you can do that if you could stop and hold the mind on one spot, stilling the mind. Okay? Now, my definition was a little bit broader than that. It just said dealing with the mind, right? Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind. Patanjali is saying, here's a way to overcome the obstacle of the mind. You hold it on one point, you still it. But different yogis had different ways, different other strategies for dealing with the mind. So commonly we hear about 4 paths of yoga. Different, even in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a mention of this. And commonly yogis speak of 4 paths of yoga. Ashtanga yoga, which is Patanjali's yoga, and Jnana yoga, Karma yoga, and Bhakti yoga. They're all yoga because each one of them is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self-experience in their own true nature. But what makes them different is that each one has a different strategy for how they're going to deal with the mind. Right? The Ashtanga yogis, they want to still the mind, hold it on. It's a very difficult path, very difficult path. They want to hold the mind on one object and go deeper into states of trance. The Jnana yogi wants to examine all of their desires that are programmed into the mind, analyze them in depth. Very stoic practice. Without any sentimentality, they want to analyze every desire in their heart, in their mind, you could say, and break it, right? See it for what it is. See the facade, break every desire until all the material desires and attachments are broken. Challenging path. Very challenging path. Karma yogis, the idea there is through service, they take on a different sense of ego, a different idea of who I am. Most of us are moving around this world trying to place ourselves in the center. Whatever karma that we do, whatever actions that we do are to bring things into our own orbit for our own pleasure and enjoyment. Karma yogi flips that and says, no, the karma yogi has all the jnana that the jnana yogi has about the nature of this world and who they are in it. But they, rather than practice it by wandering off to the forest, they engage in the world. They engage in society. They use their roles in society as the field of their contemplation of the self. And they begin to see the self not as the enjoyer or the center of this world, but as the servant, right? And that idea is harmonious with the self. And the bhakti yogis take that still further. The bhakti yogis aren't trying to still the mind. They're not trying to break all of the desires in the mind. They're engaging the mind, right? Taking the momentum that the mind has and using it, engaging it. They're not trying to break every desire. They're just trying to purify the desires, right? Harmonize the desires, harmonize the thoughts in their own mind with the nature of the self. If I can hear the right sounds, like we do here every evening, right? Or we'll be doing soon with the kirtan. If I can hear the right sounds, if I can see helpful sights, all of these temples that you see everywhere, the idea was to bring helpful, purifying vision in through the eyes, right? If I can taste the right tastes, some of the most excellent prasadam this program has. This program is providing everything for us here. You know? Sights, sounds, tastes, smells, tactile sense. The bhakti yogis are engaged in them all. Hearing Shastra, hearing these sacred texts, right? Engaging in chanting the holy name, right? Doing temple rituals, etc. All to keep the mind engaged and transformed, reshaped, harmonized with the nature of the self. And when the mind is completely in harmony with the nature of the self, we spoke about the nature of the self earlier, right? That the very essence of the self is to serve with love. And when the mind is reshaped or reprogrammed so that it's in perfect harmony with the idea that I live to serve with love, then the mind and the self are now in perfect balance, in perfect harmony, or you could say in perfect union, right? There's no longer a tension between. It's the tension between the nature of the self and the mind that causes all this anxiety, all this fear, all this boredom, all this disturbance in the mind. But when that mind becomes completely harmonized with the nature of the self, when the mind is completely programmed to understand I'm happy and wholesome and complete when I'm serving with love, then there's a union with the mind and the self. And what's another name for union? Yoga, right? That's the yoga, the bhakti yoga. Okay, so this is just the beginning of what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss the nature of the self, which we discussed a bit today. Maybe tomorrow we'll go deeper into that. And then we'll discuss what is it that prevents us from experiencing that. And as Vidura found out down in Haridwar on the bank of the Ganges River, it's simply our misidentification of the self with the mind. So then we'll talk about the mind. And then we'll talk about the practices, right? Yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing our own true nature. We'll go through all of them. And then we'll find out even what goes beyond that there's still deeper, what Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita calls the more confidential truths, right? Most confidential knowledge he speaks. He says there's secrets. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that there's secrets. He calls them, sometimes he calls them the Rajaguyam, the most secret thing, or the Guyam Shastram, the most secret, the greatest secret found in the Shastras, in the sacred texts. And that has to do with understanding that behind all of this, behind the modes of material nature, behind the force of time in the material realm, behind the law of karma, and everything that's functioning within this world, there's ultimately an intelligence. And ultimately that intelligence has a personality, and that personality you can connect with through love. And so Krishna calls that the greatest secret of all the Shastras. So we'll go into all of that kind of stuff too. We maybe have a few minutes if anyone else has any thoughts or questions they'd like to share. Please don't be shy. If not, we can stop here for now. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate spending this time with you all today. We'll be back again at the same time tomorrow. And of course, here there'll be so much happening all day, every day. I believe Premanjali is leading Kirtan next. Is that at 10? And she is a wonderful Kirtan leader. So all of His Holiness Indradyumna Swami here is, in a sense, curated this experience in such a beautiful way. Every aspect of it, from the Kirtan leaders to the prasadam that's served here, and all the rest of the staff and speakers and everyone that's served so nicely, unified. You see this unity here. Everybody's serving with one center, right? There's no selfishness. There's no ego involved. There's just the idea that we're all happy when we're all connected to that divine one, that central universal figure. And I see this as a beautiful demonstration of how we can live harmoniously like that. So Premanjali is part of that, and she's a beautiful singer. I encourage you to stay for that. I thank you all so much for spending the time with me, and we'll see you tomorrow. Hari Om Tat Sat.